Imagine that a simple parking ticket could turn into a test of power, not for the guilty, but for the law itself. Morning light slid across the wooden benches of the Providence courtroom, catching the dust in soft gold streaks. The faint hum of people waiting, shuffling papers, whispered excuses, died the moment Judge Frank Caprio entered. Calm, polite, the kind of man who carried quiet authority instead of wearing it like armor. The clerk called the next name. Case of Deborah Hale. A woman in her late 40s stood. She moved with deliberate confidence, heels clicking like punctuation marks. Black coat, diamond studs, perfect hair. The kind of presence that made the room straighten a little, as if everyone recognized the type. Someone used to being obeyed. Caprio looked up from the file. Mrs. Hale, you're cited for parking in a restricted police zone. Her tone was smooth, practiced. That's correct, Your Honor. My husband is an officer. It's his space. I was there for 5 minutes. A ripple of amusement passed through the room. She noticed it and smiled faintly, like she was still winning. The judge's expression didn't change. Those spaces are reserved for officers on duty. Were you on duty, ma'am? No, she said, but I am the wife of one. That should count for something. The murmur returned, quiet laughter, a few low whistles. Caprio leaned back, studying her. You believe your husband's badge extends to you? Deborah folded her arms. I believe respect for law enforcement should extend to their families. You, of all people, should understand that. The judge's brow lifted slightly. And what does respect have to do with ignoring the sign? Something sharp flickered in her eyes. It has to do with knowing your place, Judge. My husband works with the department. People know us. You don't want to make this bigger than it is. The air tightened. Even the guards by the door glanced up. Caprio set his pen down. Mrs. Hale, are you threatening me? Her voice was quiet but pointed. I'm advising you. He waited, letting the silence stretch until even she seemed to shift uncomfortably. Then he spoke, calm, almost gentle. In my courtroom, the law doesn't take advice. It simply asks for honesty. She smiled again, brittle this time. Honesty? The city bleeds my husband dry with overtime, and you want to talk about honesty over a parking space? The judge's tone didn't rise. I want to talk about accountability. It's what your husband swore to uphold. And from where I'm sitting, that oath applies to everyone, even those married to officers. Her jaw tensed. She was no longer sure if she was in control of the room. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. The moment felt suspended, a duel without raised voices, only principle. Caprio folded his hands. You said your husband was on duty when this happened? He was, she answered quickly. So while he was serving the public, you were taking his place. He paused, voice lowering. Tell me, Mrs. Hale, was it out of convenience or defiance? Deborah blinked, caught off guard. I don't have to answer that. You just did, the judge said softly. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was heavy, like the weight of realization pressing against pride. Even those in the back row could sense it. This wasn't about a ticket anymore. The judge tapped his gavel once, gently. Let's proceed. The sound echoed like a warning, or perhaps a promise that this small case had only just begun. Caprio didn't reach for the code book. He angled his chair instead, as if to face a neighbor at the kitchen table. Mrs. Hale, set the ticket aside for a moment. Tell me who you are when no one is watching. Her first answer was posture, chin high, shoulders squared. Then the steel softened. I'm a patrolman's wife, she said. 20 years. I know every night shift by the sound of his boots on the stairs. I know what a radio sounds like at 2 a.m. when it isn't your call. The room quieted. Even the guard by the door stopped fidgeting. My husband was the one who ran toward the shouting on Broad Street when everyone else backed up. He taught our son to keep the porch light on when he's late. She swallowed. Last fall, internal affairs pulled him off the street. Excessive force, they said. 10 seconds of a phone video and a month of headlines. No context. No sleep. Her voice roughened, just a shade. We sold his fishing boat to pay a lawyer. I kept the house together with duct tape and church casseroles. And when I parked in that space, I told myself I'd earned 5 minutes close to the door. I told myself I wasn't stealing, I was surviving. Caprio's hands folded, knuckles pale against the bench. You love the uniform enough to fight for it, he said. Do you love it enough to accept its limits? She met his eyes, anger flickering with fatigue. Limits. The badge draws its authority from restraint, he said, voice low. From saying no to yourself before you say stop to someone else. Deborah's breath hitched. A tiny tremor crossed the diamond at her ear. You think I don't know restraint? I iron creases into a man who sometimes stares at a wall because he can still hear sirens from a year ago. A soft murmur passed through the gallery. Not judgment, recognition. Caprio nodded once. I'm not questioning your devotion. I'm asking about your conclusion. You believe the world dishonored your husband, so you borrowed his authority to push back. That's not respect. That's escalation. She looked away, toward the seal above the bench, as if measuring herself against it. If people respected the job, they wouldn't treat him like a villain. Maybe I wanted to remind someone he still matters. And you chose a sign that said police only to deliver the message, Caprio said gently. A sign is a small thing, until it stands between fatigue and privilege. For a heartbeat, she didn't speak. When she did, the edge had dulled. He used to come home whistling, she said. Now he counts steps from the cruiser to the door. I'm tired of watching him shrink. Caprio's reply was soft as felt. Then help him stand without bending the rules that hold him up. She drew a long, steadying breath. You make it sound simple. It's rarely simple, he said. But it is clear. He glanced down at the file, then back at her. One more question. Why come without him? Deborah hesitated. Because he told me not to ask for favors. He said, if they call you, go. Answer for what you did. Her mouth tightened. I didn't like that. Caprio let the truth settle, light as dust in the morning beams. He asked you to do the hardest part of his oath, the part that starts at home. She stood straighter, but the fight in her eyes had changed shape, less spear than shield. The judge closed the folder without a bang. Very well, he said. Now that I know who you are, we can talk about what you did. The benches creaked as the room leaned forward, understanding that the next turn would cut deeper than a fine. Caprio lifted the next page of the file, slow, deliberate, like a man turning the last card in a deck he already knew. Mrs. Hale, he said, before we continue, I reviewed the citation log. The officer who issued this ticket was P. Hale. That's your husband, isn't it? Her face froze. A ripple ran through the courtroom. Quiet gasps, a muffled cough, someone whispering, no way. Yes, she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. But that must be an error. The judge shook his head. It isn't. His signature is here. The timestamp matches the moment the patrol car stopped behind your SUV. Deborah blinked rapidly, as if the light in the room had suddenly turned cruel. He wouldn't do that to me. Not now. Caprio didn't answer. He just watched the color drain from her face. He did, he said gently, and he filed no request to rescind it. Her mouth tightened. Then he's punishing me. Or teaching you. Caprio replied. The line landed like a gavel, quiet, but absolute. She leaned forward, the sharpness returning to her tone. You don't know him. He's not the kind of man to embarrass his wife. He's angry, bitter. Ever since that investigation, he's different. I'm the one who kept this family together, while he sat in the dark pretending to protect something. The judge's brow furrowed slightly. Pretending. He lectures me about rules, about honor, about doing things by the book. But where was that honor when they dragged his name through the mud? Where was the department then? Caprio let her finish, then reached for a slim envelope inside the folder. He tapped it lightly against the bench. Do you know what this is? She didn't answer. It's the dashcam report, he said. I reviewed it this morning. Her eyes flashed. You can't. I can, he said simply. And I did. He opened the envelope, sliding out a still image clipped from the footage. Her car, the sign clearly visible, and her husband standing beside it, writing the ticket. What did he say? She asked, barely breathing. Caprio read from the note attached. Officer Hale stated, law isn't a badge you wear at home. If I let her go, I've already failed twice. The words hung heavy, echoing against the paneled walls. Deborah whispered, he really said that? The judge nodded. He also added, she won't understand today. Maybe one day she will. She pressed her lips together, but the tremor in her jaw betrayed her. For the first time, the defiance looked fragile, like a costume unraveling at the seams. Caprio's voice softened. Mrs. Hale, you said earlier that your husband wasn't the same since the fall. I believe you. But maybe the change you see isn't weakness. Maybe it's him trying to hold on to the only thing he has left, his integrity. The words seemed to reach her, though she didn't move. Her eyes glistened, unfocused, as if replaying 100 late-night arguments. "He's not perfect," she said. "He drinks too much coffee, forgets birthdays, barely sleeps. But he's not heartless." "No," said Caprio quietly. "He's human, and humans fail. But some still remember why the rules exist, to keep them from falling too far." She took a deep breath, then asked the question like a plea. "What am I supposed to do with that, Judge? Pretend I'm proud that my husband ticketed me?" He leaned forward, folding his hands. "Maybe start by being proud that he didn't ask me to erase it." The gallery was silent now. Even the faint hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. Caprio continued, slower now. "Your husband believes in the law enough to risk losing comfort for principle. That's rare. And you have the power to turn this moment into humiliation or into healing. The choice is yours." She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted, not surrender, but recognition. The anger hadn't vanished, but it no longer blinded her. Finally she whispered, "I thought I was protecting him. Maybe I was only protecting myself." Caprio nodded once, solemnly. "That's the thing about protection, Mrs. Hale. Sometimes it's just fear wearing armor." The courtroom stayed silent for several seconds, a stillness deeper than noise, filled with the quiet shock of truth. Then, softly, Caprio said, "Let's take a brief recess." He struck the gavel once, but it sounded different this time. Less judgment, more mercy. Caprio's gaze held hers, steady, unflinching, almost fatherly. "Mrs. Hale," he said, his voice low, deliberate, "you knew your husband wrote that ticket. But you didn't come here to deny it. You came to prove he was wrong." The words landed like stones dropped in still water. Deborah looked down. Her posture, once proud, bent slightly under the weight of his tone. "He hasn't spoken to me since," she murmured. "We live under the same roof, but it's like we're in different worlds. When I saw that paper on the windshield, it felt like he'd finally chosen the law over me." Caprio's reply came gently, almost like a sigh. "Or maybe he chose both. Sometimes the only way to protect someone is to tell them the truth, even when it hurts." The courtroom was silent, so still that the soft click of the clerk's pen sounded like thunder. Then, movement. The doors at the back opened. A man in uniform stepped inside. Every head turned. The air shifted. Officer Patrick Hale, tall, tired around the eyes, holding his cap in both hands, walked slowly down the aisle. He hadn't been called. He simply came. Deborah's face went pale. Caprio nodded slightly toward him. "Officer Hale," he said quietly, "did you wish to speak?" Patrick's voice was calm, careful. "Your Honor, I'm not here to testify. I came to stand behind whatever decision you make. But I do have one thing to say." He paused, scanning the room, then his wife. "I wrote that ticket because I realized I couldn't keep being the man who makes exceptions, not even for the person I love most." Deborah inhaled sharply. "Patrick." Caprio raised a hand, not unkindly. "Not yet, Mrs. Hale." The officer continued, eyes fixed on his wife. "For years, I thought protecting you meant shielding you from everything ugly, from the job, from the rules, from the weight of it all. But it turned me into someone I don't recognize. I can't preach fairness on the street and practice favoritism at home." She blinked quickly, fighting the tremor in her jaw. "You embarrassed me in front of the whole department." "I was trying to remind both of us who I used to be," he said softly. "The man you married wore that badge with pride. I want to be him again, even if it means you hate me for a while." Caprio didn't interrupt. He let the silence stretch until it became almost unbearable. Finally, he spoke, measured, precise. "Mrs. Hale, today isn't about him judging you. It's about you seeing yourself clearly. The hardest verdict is always the one we render in our own hearts." The gallery held its breath. Deborah's lip quivered. For a moment, it looked like she might lash out again, but instead her voice broke. "You think this was easy for me? Watching you disappear behind that badge?" Patrick took a half step closer, stopping only when Caprio's subtle gesture told him to. "I know it wasn't easy," he said. "But the uniform didn't take me away. The distance between us did." She closed her eyes, and for the first time since the hearing began, she didn't fight back. Caprio leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "The truth, Mrs. Hale," he said quietly, "isn't a weapon. It's a mirror. And today, it's finally facing both of you." The judge's gavel came down softly, once, not as a command, but as punctuation. The courtroom remained frozen, caught between heartbreak and relief, a collective understanding that something irreversible had just happened. Caprio motioned toward the front row. "Please," he said, "both of you sit." The officer obeyed first, lowering himself onto the bench beside his wife. For the first time in months, their shoulders nearly touched. The judge folded his hands. "What we're dealing with today isn't a parking violation," he began softly. "It's what happens when pride builds higher walls than the law ever could." Deborah wiped at her cheek, but didn't look away. "You think I don't know that? I just wanted him to choose me, once. Not the badge, not the rules. Me." Patrick's head bowed slightly. When he spoke, his voice carried the weary gravity of someone who'd rehearsed the words in silence. "I did choose you," he said. "Every night I walked out that door and came back in one piece. Every time I took a shift so you could sleep through the noise. But if I give up the part of me that knows right from wrong, then what's left for you to love?" His words landed with the kind of quiet that shakes a room. Caprio's gaze moved between them. "You're both right," he said. "And you're both wrong. The law and love don't cancel each other out. They test whether our hearts can hold both." The courtroom was utterly still. Sunlight slipped through the windows, dust drifting in the air like slow-falling snow. "Mrs. Hale," Caprio continued, "you've spent months defending your husband's honor against the world. But tell me, when did you last defend your own?" Deborah's eyes shimmered. "I thought I was. I thought standing up for him meant standing tall for both of us." "Sometimes," the judge said gently, "we stand tallest when we bow our heads." Patrick reached for her hand, hesitating before touching it, as if unsure whether the gesture would be accepted. After a breath, she let his fingers find hers. Caprio gave a small nod. "Mr. Hale, you've carried the law like armor. But even armor can turn heavy if you never take it off. Perhaps today is the moment you both remember why you put it on in the first place." He reached for the file again, closing it with finality. "The fine remains," he said, "not as punishment, but as proof that respect is something we pay forward, not demand." Deborah managed a small, trembling smile. "Then I'll pay it," she whispered. "But not from my wallet, from my pride." A few people in the gallery exhaled audibly. One woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Caprio smiled faintly, not triumphant, tired, almost relieved. "That," he said, "is the first payment I've seen today that means anything." Patrick looked at his wife, the hardness in his features dissolving. "Deborah," he said quietly, "for what it's worth, I never wanted to win. I just wanted us to stop losing." She turned toward him, tears tracing the edges of her defiance. "Then maybe," she said, "we finally stopped." The judge rose slowly, as if unwilling to disturb the fragile peace that had settled over the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the gallery, "what you witnessed wasn't justice served. It was something rarer, understanding reached." He lifted the gavel, paused for a breath, and added, "Case closed." The wooden strike echoed through the chamber, sharp, final, yet oddly tender. Deborah stood, clutching the folded citation in both hands. She looked at her husband and, for the first time in months, didn't see an officer in uniform, just the man she'd once waited for at the kitchen window. "Let's go home," she said quietly. He nodded, and together they turned toward the lights spilling through the courthouse doors. The courtroom emptied slowly, the way people leave a church after a confession. The murmur of footsteps faded down the marble corridor until only the soft rustle of papers remained. Judge Caprio sat alone at the bench, his glasses resting beside the closed file. He didn't look triumphant, just thoughtful, as though the weight of the morning lingered on his shoulders. The clerk approached. "Long day, Your Honor?" Caprio smiled faintly. "A necessary one." He glanced toward the door where the Hales had stood moments earlier. Justice isn't always about guilt or innocence. Sometimes, it's just about letting people see themselves clearly, maybe for the first time. Outside, the afternoon sun stretched across the courthouse steps. Deborah stood there, holding the payment slip between her fingers. The paper trembled slightly in the wind. Patrick was a few steps below her, his hands in his pockets, his hat under one arm. For a long moment, neither spoke. The traffic hummed. A car horn echoed somewhere in the distance. Then she walked down slowly, stopping in front of him. "This belongs to both of us," she said. Her voice was steady now, not the brittle edge of pride, but something quieter, anchored. She placed the check in his hand, closing his fingers around it. Pay it for me. And tell them this time, I'm not ashamed of your name. Patrick looked at her, really looked, and the faintest smile crept across his face. You sure? I'm sure. For a beat, they stood in silence. Then he nodded once, and together they turned toward the corner bank across the square. The wind lifted a few leaves from the courthouse steps, swirling them behind like echoes of everything they'd left unsaid. Inside, Caprio gathered his papers into a neat stack. The sunlight caught on the brass nameplate in front of him, making the engraved word justice glow faintly. He paused, resting a hand on it, and spoke almost to himself. Justice isn't equality, he murmured. It's the courage to look past the uniform and see the heart still beating under it. He slipped the file into the cabinet, turned off the lamp, and walked toward the same doorway where hundreds had stood before, some defiant, some broken, all human. As he stepped outside, he caught sight of the couple across the street, standing together by the payment window. Deborah's hand rested on her husband's arm. For the first time that day, they looked like a team. The judge allowed himself a quiet smile before descending the courthouse steps. The wind carried faint laughter, hers, followed by the sound of coins dropping into the tray. He didn't turn back. He didn't need to. The city moved on, slow, imperfect, alive. And somewhere in the middle of it all, one small act of humility had restored more than a marriage. It had reminded everyone watching that fairness, when guided by compassion, could still heal what pride had broken. The courthouse clock struck noon. Caprio adjusted his coat, looked up at the bright blue sky, and whispered, so softly it was almost lost in the noise of the city. Case closed for all of us. The gavel sound returned one last time, not sharp, but warm, blending into the hush of the street, a rhythm of resolution rather than punishment. Then, only the sound of footsteps, two sets, fading together down the sidewalk.